Dames en heren, meine Damen und Herren, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for inviting me. I don't feel qualified to speak, looking at all the fellow grey-haired people here. You've got wisdom. I'm still looking for wisdom. I did a study on Stellenbosch district history a few years ago, 2010 to 2014. There was a publication in 2016 on Stellenbosch and slavery, and this came as a new challenge when I was asked to talk about Swellendam and about slavery as well. Oh yes, I don't know how loud I'm talking. I lost my hearing in my left ear about a month ago. I hope it will get better. So if it's too loud, please let me know. If it's too soft, please let me know. I'm not used to talking with a microphone. First of all, I have to tell you some of my personal experiences about the topic of slavery. I visited a distant cousin of my father in Caledon in 1953, and there was an old black man on the farm, and his name was Masala, and my parents told me that he was the son of a slave from Mozambique. It didn't make sense because slavery stopped in 1838 finally in the Cape. He couldn't have been that old, or he somehow didn't fit in. Thing is, after 1806, when all slavery was stopped as a system in all the colonies. In the Cape Colony, it only ended in 1834, also all the other British colonies, but they could not import any more slaves. But they the British government hijacked slavers coming around the Cape, and these slaves were called prize negroes, and they were then rented out to people who worked. And so that, as late as 1870, 1880, you still had black people coming from Mozambique and Madagascar, Zanzibar, coming to South Africa. And when I said Mozambique, I also included Malawi. It was very interesting that some of our missionaries who came from Worcester and who went to Malawi in 1885, 1890, they learned Chichewa in Worcester from some of these people. So it is quite possible that Masala could have been the son of an ex-slave brought to freedom, or so-called freedom, at the Cape. So that was my first experience of a black man speaking Afrikaans, speaking Afrikaans, belonging to the Dutch Reformed Church, the whole lot. Then, those of you who went my age, who went to school, in the primary school we had the silverworm reeks, for standard 3, 2, 3, 4, 5. And in that, they had a story about the slave, and the picture at the end, it was a sad story. I remember feeling very emotional about it, of the old black man, the slave, who died, and everybody cried. And I also felt like that. This was in primary school. And then, of course, Uncle Tom's Cabin. You can see various editions in English, also in Dutch. In kyk hier op het hut van Oom Tom, en dan in Afrikaans die hut van Outa Tom. Ik weet niet die jaartal waar het verskyn het, maar dit was wat 'n mens geleer het van slawegeskiedenis. I went to Union High School in 1960 to 61, and we did something about slavery, about the wicked Dr. Philip, and all the problems he caused in our history course. But what I do remember is that, coming back to Uncle Tom, is that slaves were not allowed to wear shoes at the Cape. It was a status thing. If you're a slave, no shoes. Then I started teaching in Malawi, 67, 68. And when I got there, I was the only single person on the staff, and I was immediately appointed as the sports games master. That meant soccer and field running and all that. And on the way one day to the soccer field, being a klein Karoo boykie, I went barefoot and shorts. And then one of the black students asked me, "Sir, why do you go barefoot?" And I thought I was going to make a little joke, and I said, "I'm a kapolo." Kapolo is the Chichewa word for slave. And immediately I saw the people who heard what I said, they were shocked. And then being diplomatic or political, I just ignored the reaction. But then I realized for the first time in 1967 in Malawi that the word slave is totally taboo. You don't use it. In 1996, I read a paper at Madagascar at a conference in Tana, and that was the first time that the word slave was used in Madagascar in open society at an academic meeting, because it was a taboo word, like today the K word or the H word, whatever, the B word as well. So this was, to me, quite interesting, the reaction that for the first time people talked about it. Slavery is such an emotional word in current society, or at least in African society. 2 years ago, 2-3 years ago, I was in the archives and I went with my friends to have coffee. They discovered a coffee shop, all these coffee shops, more coffee shops in Cape Town than bars. So we went to this coffee shop, which belongs to a person from Madagascar, black. And we had coffee, nice coffee, and afterwards before we left, I asked him, being a historian, I always ask questions, I asked him, do you speak Makua? And he looked at me, most disgusted, and he said, I speak French and English. Because the history of Madagascar, they were, the first people came from Polynesia, and then they imported slaves. The Arabs brought slaves from the African coast to Madagascar. So you have got a two-tier system, an elite group of Polynesian descent and the majority of African, Makua and Chichewa, also from Malawi descent. But their language is Makua, and this man was so disgusted that I could associate his appearance, physical appearance, with that of what used to be slaves. So till today, slavery is a very, very emotional thing. If you look at in the context of races. Now to get the right button. Swellendam district. I concentrated on Stellenbosch, the shaded area, that is Stellenbosch, but the rest is Swellendam district until the borders were fixed, going right up to Sanders River, Fish River, up to Port Elizabeth. Then, if you didn't know this, is maybe of interest, then Stellenbosch district was the shaded area, and Stellenbosch district came from just from this side of the Holland mountain range, right up to the Gamtoos River, which is a vast district. I grew up in the Long Kloof, which is around here, which was then originally part of the Swellendam district, the Long Kloof and Little Karoo. Okay, first of all, I'm not an organized type of person, so the slides may be I've tried to put some order into it, some logical order, but don't be surprised if funny things, not funny things, but strange things occur in between. Coming back to Swellendam, the earliest people at the Cape, the Khoikhoi and the San, very nice pictures, also of the San pictures at the bottom. I think it comes from the Cederberg, I'm not quite sure. I got it from Google Pictures. But this is typical, the whole Khoi culture centered around owning cattle and sheep, as you know by now, and the son of the bushman, hunter-gatherers, in total harmony with nature. We've got a picture, that's because it's a nice picture. 1845 of Genadendal. Genadendal was originally part of Stellenbosch district, but after the last slide you will see that it formed part of Swellendam. The houses, rectangular, not traditional Mikey's huis, which is also a cultural thing. The Europeans, everything must be measured and must be straight, perhaps practical, but the Mikey's huis in Makwaland are very practical, as you probably know. The reeds, when it rains, when it's not raining, you've got a nice circulation of air. When it rains, the reeds start to swell, and it is waterproof. So it's the ideal system and something we can perhaps think about in the future, but difficult to fit any furniture in these things. Anyway, if you look at the people, they're supposed to be Khoi. It was started as a settlement for the Moravian missionaries, and it was a Khoi settlement from the start. But eventually, you also had slaves coming into this settlement, and there was a German missionary director of the Berlin Mission Society. He visited Genadendal in 1865, and he said the last 2 or 3 people who were genuine Khoi already died. So, and then he was a very good artist, and he made some drawings of people in Genadendal, and they were not Khoi. They were, in my opinion, slaves from Madagascar, because of the intermarriage between slaves and Khoi. But we come to that later on. Facts about the Khoi in Swellendam, Tomlinson book, Geskiedkundige Swellendam. Tomlinson, at least 3 photographs of graves of Khoi captains. Captain Kleitjie's kraal, Captain Marcus Ababa, and the Heesekwa captain, who was a Heesekwa captain at Marcus Kraal, Wonderbokskloof. I don't know where Wonderbokskloof is, but this is what I got from the book. Also Captain Nouga Saree, farm or the settlement Oudtuin. And then, quite interesting, I looked at the Government Gazette of 1812, 1814, and I came across an entry. The Hottentot captains received a salary, annual salary. And in the same period, I came across an entry paid for the expenses of making 12 wooden kiddies with knobs. Now, if you know the old Dutch East India Company tradition, they acknowledged the chiefs, the Heesekwa chief or the Nekwa chief, and they gave them this staff with this brass head with a VOC sign on it. So the British continued with this system. I was a bit skeptical, I still am skeptical about Khoisan chiefs appearing suddenly all over the country, in Cape Town, also I suppose here. I'm skeptical because somehow you have to prove that you are of Khoisan descent or of a certain chief. In my own case, I'm an 11th generation descendant of Eva or Kutua of the Cape, like at least 200,000 living white South Africans today. So I can prove, I've got a documentary proof going to all my German and my French ancestors back to Simon, you know his story. So I can prove that, but I doubt it if these so-called chiefs can lay any claim. The thing, you see, I'll have to run through this, but just as a matter of interest, why do these chiefs suddenly split up, because I believe that in the same way as the black chiefs in the Transkei, the Ciskei, Zululand, they receive a government salary. And I believe that is this sudden interest in this Khoisan revival, which is the same as in Australia. In the 1980s, every Australian tried to prove that he was of Aborigine descent. Because if you can prove that, you don't have to pay income tax. It's a very strong motive. By the way, on the internet, everything is available today. A valuable source is the records of the Cape Colony. About 42 volumes, 30. And that can be downloaded free of charge if you've got Wi-Fi. And a lot of other publications. Also at the end I'll give you my email address where I can give you copies of certain books I refer to. Okay, we move on. Just for how many, when you have, did I start at 1:30?
Yes, you do.
Okay, I'll run through this quickly. Here you've got a tax roll, opgaafrol, of 1825, which I found for the first time, of the Khoi living in Swellendam district. And you can see what they own, very little. The name of the field cornet is Saul Esau. And Klaas Hendrik, Adam Versagi, Kipidu, they were all recognized by the government. And also the Kel Links from Namaqualand, he's now working at the Department of Economics on the economic situation of the Khoi at the Cape, which is quite interesting. A lot of them had their own wagons, they did transport, that sort of thing. They were entrepreneurs in Swellendam district, but we're going to focus on the slaves. To the right, Early Slavery at the Cape of Good Hope, Karl Skuman, a very good book in English also. This picture was made at the tree where the slaves were sold in Cape Town, between the Grote Kerk, the church, and the Cultural Historical Museum. This tree was where all the auctions took place, and there you can see people obviously from Mozambique or from Africa. Then, funny thing, I'll try to get back. Yeah. To the top left, a wine wagon going from Stellenbosch to Cape Town, to the market. And if you look at the hat, it's a Malay, a Muslim. He doesn't drink. So that's where religion was important, because if it was an ordinary slave born in the Cape, probably about half of the wine would have disappeared between Stellenbosch and Cape Town. Here you've got Anna de Koning, the daughter of Angela of Bengal, a slave, beautiful woman, and then her husband from Sweden, Olof Berg. I used to call it the Beauty and the Beast. Just a picture, departures from Madagascar on the way to Cape Town. Here is a typical house, a farmhouse of the Cape gentry, and the slave house can immediately be identified. It's smaller than the main mansion, but you've got three chimneys, because they keep the slave women and the slave men and the married couples in different quarters, and in winter it becomes very cool. So every section had its own chimney. So if you had a building that looked like a shed with two chimneys, you know immediately that was the slave quarters of the time. Population of the Cape Colony in 1806. The number of Christians who lived in Cape Town, the Cape district, Stellenbosch and Swellendam. That's a blue one. You can see off blue. This is the population of the Cape, and this was a very important part of white people and 3 black people lived in this district. The slaves, again, less than in Stellenbosch and the Cape District and Cape Town. The Khoi, if you look at it in relation to the district, in Cape Town you had a handful of Khoi people, and in the Cape District as well, more in Stellenbosch, but in Swellendam you had quite a large number of Khoi people. Then, if you look at this, then you can read this. This was 1801. They got a number, 70 prime male and female slaves, captured in a French vessel, I'm not going to say that, and condemned as prize at the court of the Vice Admiralty in Cape Town. So people could buy these slaves captured by the British from the French, because France and Britain was at war at this stage. It was booty. This is just city life, very sophisticated. People being carried in these sedan chairs. Another poor bloke going to the jail. And then also after manumission, you had a very large number of freed people who bought their own freedom or were set free by their owners, and they were with the British flag. They had a platoon of their own, and you can again see the mark of the East Indians, who were all Muslims. A picture to the right of a woman who was born in slavery, grew up on a farm in the Western Cape. And here you've got a drawing by the German visitor at the Cape, who drew the people at Swellendam. And here you can see Frederik Johannes, Klaas Koen, Jacob Prima, and you see the variety of between white and black. That's our history story. It's not this homogeneous group. The population of the Cape Colony in 1818, whites, quite a large number, 3 blacks, small group, Khoi, and then again the slaves, quite a very large number of the population. More slave numbers, the burghers 125, 52 in 1670. If we come to 1798, we've got 20,000 white people, burghers, 25,000 slaves. Slaves outnumbered the white population at the Cape. Then, when we come to the origin of imported slaves, not born here, but imported and emancipated in 1834 when they were all set free. I had a figure of 5,681 cases. The vast majority came from Mozambique, and then from Madagascar, Bengal, Batavia, which we should group, Malabar and Bengal being India, of course, and Ceylon can also be classified. Makua, that is the small enclave into China, which belonged to Portugal. Then comments on the physical characteristics of slaves at the Cape in 1834. In some districts they gave the name of the slave, age, condition, and then they made comments. Romana of the Cape, age 29. A Mozambique servant, good looking, but she was not from Mozambique. She looked like a Mozambican. She was born at the Cape. So the father and the mother could have been Mozambican slaves. Kaiki of the Cape, age 17, clever, and she's a Malabar, seen as the appearance of an Indian girl. Fritz of the Cape, age 33, head servant, Afrikaner, that was the name for slaves who had white parentage, or the father was white. 6 feet 3 inches, in charge of oxen and trips to Cape Town from Graafrenet. Janetta of the Cape, the child of Constantia, nearly white, a Pierce child from a European father. Christina of the Cape, born 1827, child of Sarah, looks like Hottentot, father is Hottentot. So within the slave society, you had people who could have been white, Khoi, black, African, Mozambican. It is a cultural term, it is not a physical term when we talk about slaves. Now, the average price of age, by age and given in pence or pennies at the Cape Colony in 1834, you peaked at about 30, age 30, then you had the highest value. And then the shocking, I think the shocking thing is values of the Cape. At birth, £7 10 shillings, that was what you were worth. 2-year-olds, £11.5, 3 years, £15, 4 year, 22, 5 year, £30, 6-year-olds, £25. A 10-year-old slave had the value of a 50-year-old slave, £83. But the average value of a 63-year-old slave was £7 and 10 shillings, the same as the date of birth. The moment that baby was born, the baby was worth £7.10, and if you went over 63, then you became nearly worthless. It was shocking when I saw this the first time. The Cape of Good Hope slave numbers at emancipation in 1834, the total number of slaves, nearly 36,000, 35,745, children under the age of 6, 5,000, unfit, also classified as old, feeble and blind, 3,200. And then the suggested compensation in England used was at first £3 million, but in the end only £1.2 million were paid out. So for the Cape Colony, you had 6,580 slave owners who claimed money. So it is only 1/3 of the value of a slave that was paid out by the British government. And the money could only be collected in England, in the UK, so in London, so you had to get somebody to get it physically in London. Then they had to be transported to the Cape. You had to pay a local agent to act as intermediary. So in the end, you got at the most 1/4 of the value of a slave. Relevance of slavery, I highlighted Swellendam, 1,978 male and 1,754 female slaves, a total of 3,007. So that runs behind Cape Town, Cape District and Stellenbosch. So it was the third biggest slave owning group at the Cape. Prices of sold in the open market in 1830. The nearer to Cape Town, the more slaves you had. It was a question of supply and demand. If you went to Uitenhage, over £106 for a slave, bought in transactions. So if you compare that, there were very few slaves available on the eastern frontier. The origins of slaves registered in Swellendam in 1816, born in the Cape Colony, 487, born in Mozambique, 25%, and then significant, very small, insignificant numbers. So the majority of slaves in Swellendam district came from Mozambique. This dropped in 1834, in only 1 out of 7 in this few years later came from Mozambique. Bourbon, one of the French islands, Makassar, Bugis, Mauritius, Malabar, and so on. Now what did they do? Arbeiders, laborers, gardeners, house workers, cooks, washwomen. And that was especially the case with nearly all Mozambican women were washwomen. They did the washing because it was a hard physical task, and the Mozambican people were, male and female, were known for their strength. Also, of course, shepherds and woodcutters. Then carpenters, tailors, coachmen, wagon drivers, wagon makers, masons, shoemakers, blacksmiths, tanners and saddle makers. And you had a number of people coming from Cape Town to buy slaves at Swellendam, and they were then people like masons or blacksmiths who were trained workers. The typical slave entry, as you find it in the archives in Cape Town, Hendrik van As and the number of his slaves, those, without any commentary on the right-hand side, they were still alive in 1834, and he was compensated for these slaves. The other, well, all the entries here meant either it was transferred to somebody else or the slave died. And now we come to something interesting. I'll just summarize from 1816 to 1834. This is the period covered by these registers. In 1816, the British government at the Cape made a law that every slave owner had to keep record of his slaves. He had to register it at the landros or the magistrate, and keep, if he sold the slave, it was entered to who and at what date. If the slave died, at what, the exact date, and so on. So everything is very, very well documented. Of the 15 slaves of Van As, 3 died at the ages of 44, 50 and 63 respectively. Sort of normal curve. 2 of these slaves were imported from Mozambique. The child of the slave, Manissa, called Joseph, died at the age of 7 months. Most slave mortalities occurred before the slave child reached the age of 2. He also sold 8 slaves to burghers in Swellendam. And when the slaves were set free in 1834, he owned only 3 slaves. Again, Nicolaas Linde, senior, 1816 to 1834, this list. You can see he had also very few slaves, the rest were sold or died. Just to summarize, in 1834 he owned 11 slaves. In the end he received £460 in compensation, and this represented a value of approximately 42 per slave, 42 pounds, which was much higher than the average. Normally, the slave owner would get 35 pounds per slave, so he was quite lucky. He had 37 slaves altogether. He sold 20 to 12 members of this extended family, of the Linde family, and also one to Barry from Cape Town, who came to probably bought a mason or a blacksmith. Of his slaves, 8 were imported from Mozambique, 1 from Malabar, India, 1 from Bengal, also in India. The rest were all Cape born. Of the slaves in his possession, 5 died on the farm, 3 were infants, another male slave 38, and a Mozambique slave aged 60. Also summarize Nicolaas Linde, who was married to Susanna Heese, and then she died. He remarried Rautenbach and remarried after her death van Deventer. He had 9 children. This is the family, the Linde family. He had 9 children, but of these 4 died in infancy. Hans Jurgen, Katrina, 1790, Hans Jurgen, 1796, 1799, 1802. And then again, as I say, the high incidence of deaths among infants in the slave population of the Cape correlates with that of the white population at the time. Antoni Keiter probably had the largest number of slaves, 46 on his roll, and he claimed the money from the British government. But exceptional, he also bought a slave, Doortje, of the Cape, and after he bought her, he set her free, made her, she became free, not a slave anymore. The reason one can speculate about, perhaps he fancied her, I don't know, it could have been, but normally one would not buy a slave girl, have her for a few months and then set her free. There was also a ruling at the Cape that if you had a child by a slave woman, the owner, that slave woman had to be set free. In 1820 he bought the slave Marie van die Kaap, born 1736, he bought her, and in 1826 she died at the age of 90, and we come back to that as well. We don't have time. I referred at the bottom, I referred to Cape Melting Pot and Reg en Onreg. Cape Melting Pot is a translation of Groep van de Grenzen by somebody I know. But reg en onreg, that is in Afrikaans. But if you send me an email, I will send it to you if you are interested in these stories. About Jan Adam Bauer from Würzburg. In 1776, he had a girlfriend, Johanna, the Khoi, the daughter of Nella, but he also had a child by both the mother and by the daughter. So he was banned from the Cape because of incest. Also the murder of the German Sebastian Roodman's wife and the Knecht Kramer, and also the daughter of Roodman, who's a very well-known Swellendam family. It's a long story, you can read that, how the number of slaves from Cape Town deserted. They got a letter stating that they were slachtersknechten. They went to the interior to buy cattle and bring it back for the slagpalen in Cape Town, that sort of thing. And they murdered the Roodman family in the district. They had charms, Muslim or charms and funny figures written on it in Arabic to protect them from being captured. That twice, the first time when they crossed the river, the little signs, the letter, it was washed away, and they returned to Cape Town to get a new letter from a schoolboy who helped them to write that. Very interesting case, this is a Roodman story. Also the murder of Hendrik Oswald Ekstein at Gouwitz in 1758. I don't know if you know about it. It's a fascinating story of this. He was the illegitimate son of the German Oswald Ekstein, and he cohabitated with a Khoi woman, and then eventually she plotted to have him killed at the Gouwitz River. They had two farms, and it was, it's a fascinating story. There's no time to tell it, but you can read about it. If you type that into Dr. Google, will help you with that. But this is also in this, I write about it, little few details in Reg en Onreg, which I can send you if you're interested. Slavery was an inhuman and cruel institution, especially in the plantation economies in the Americas. The cruel side of slavery at the Cape may perhaps have been more mild than elsewhere. A perception held traditionally by South African historians, then turned around about 1970, 1790, 1880. It became the most evil system. But then again, coming back to Swellendam, there was a free black, August of Bengal, who lived in Swellendam in 1834, and also had a slave, Sylvia of the Cape. It was not a black-white thing, it was a status thing, or it was where you were assimilated with. A clue to such a study on how cruel slavery was to compare it with other societies. I look here at the birth intervals. As in the white society, about 2 years intervals. Most of the children of this slave woman, Nadrina of the Cape, reached maturity. Here is a graphic of the life duration distribution at the Cape, 1650-1950. If you can see, I said that slave children died within the first year. You can see that it's nearly half of the people born, and this is the average. This is white society in South Africa. Then at age 15, 16, you find decreases. And that coincides, I believe, this is my theory, with the childbirth, the first child. It quite often happened that women died at childbirth. I've got a database of about 4,400 slaves, giving the name of the slave, the owner, the occupation, place of birth, etc. If you're interested, I can download it in the museum archive, museum computer, or Philip, and then it's freely available. You can play with it. I already mentioned this. The Khoisan, in Angola you had the same situation where the Afrikaner society community, people complained of the high incidence of women dying with their first childbirth. Also for 1824, one of the wards of Swellendam, you can see no Christians affected, 100 women died, 3 male slaves died in this district. Prominent descendants of slaves, Khoisan and whites in modern South Africa, Richard van der Ross, the rector of Western Cape University, Jonathan Jansen, who was the rector of Free State University, Jake Scadwell of Western Cape University, Son, first name?
Percy.
Franklin Son. Then Russell Botman down here, passed away 2-3 years ago, rector of Stellenbosch University. You know him? Kusato,
Francois.
Tony Ehrenreich. And in the Rhenish Mission Church of 1840, you find his great-great-grandfather, Karl Friedrich Ehrenreich, married to or baptized a child in Stellenbosch in the Mission Church. Then Harold de Vyers. Harold de Vyers is to me African in the Mozambican sense or Malawi sense or East African sense, from appearance and from build. And then S.W. Peterson, the well-known poet and author, Afrikaans author from Riversdale, whose grandfather came from Sweden, and his grave is in Heidelberg English Church graveyard. And then Busak, Villa Busak, who is one of the champions of the Khoisan revival movement. Thank you, by Dank. This was done I started off with a picture of the Rosday, so I thought I had to end with the picture in this presentation. Please ask questions. I touched here and there. You might perhaps have interesting questions I might perhaps be able to answer. I'll try my best. Is that okay, Philip?
Absolutely.
How did they make the slaves work?
Man must work to eat. Short of laws are. No, we all work. We all have to work. We've got no choice. It was, shall we call it a question of mentality? I added 2 more slides, but they're not slides, they're PowerPoint. They are video clips, but we don't have sound. But perhaps we can have a look at it. If you like the old silent movies. Oh, sorry. Good phone. Yeah. It worked at home.
It doesn't need a soundtrack.
You worked hard all day.
Not monument electric anymore. No. advertisement. It's quite old. They don't make them anymore. Definitely close this. And in this one, which is, I used to teach our international students at Western Cape. They came for semesters from all over, Germany, America, Denmark, Sweden, Austria, France. And after a few lectures, I think they had to see this and to give comments on this. This is sorry, time's up. These two video clips. I remember I took them in small groups, 5, 6 at a time. When I thought it was quite courageous of me to present them with this, confront them with this reality. People like these adverts. Black, white, colored, everybody enjoyed it. Both the fourth one and of course the clip that I've won. But if you analyze it, the first one is based on I'm here, you here, of unequal terms, whereas the second one is a positive one, where people of the same standing, the same sort of culture, where this is amazing, a most amazing country. In my daily experience with black, white, colored, Indian, Muslim, Jewish, whatever, Hindu, I find 99% of the time that people are as friendly towards me as I'm friendly towards them. Really, this is my experience of we are a decent society. Forget about, we have a terrible past, but we still are, and we still are a very decent society. And this distance is gone. And they started with because you had this distance. You were told you had to do it, and you had to do it. Finishing class, that was the way it was. But things change. And I think people want to work if they've got a choice. In South Africa, people want to work. Black people, white people, colored people, Indian people want to work if they get the opportunity. It's a necessity. But I still don't know how you trained the first one to do the work. I don't know. Yes, at the back.
When did the surnames come into being?
Sorry?
When did their surnames come into being?
Oh, you've got it January, February, right up to December. That was, usually it was a case you bought the slave in January, so you called him January. You bought one in April, you called him April. And you had April from Bengal on your farm, and you had April from Mozambique, if they were both bought in the same month. Quite often they had biblical names, they had Old Testament names, they had classical Greek names, Apollos, and I have to go through a list, but it was fancy names. Venus, for example, and Adonis, Greek god of He was a fancy boy, I believe. This. Yeah, so it was at random. But then also Dutch names like Jan, Koos, Piet, that sort of names, taken from the... The moment, that is the big question. Nobody has ever studied this phenomenon, but I believe it came into being when they were baptized in the churches. They sort of demanded a surname. And for example, the case of, let's call Jansen, a colored person called Jansen. He received the surname because his father was Jan, so he was Jansen, Cornelis of Jan. They never got the names of the mothers, but of the alleged fathers. I found only one case where a colored person living today received the name of his mother. It's virtually never happened. It always took the name of the father, who was then of course also a slave.
To what extent did they get the surnames of their owners? Like, and there are lots of brown and white branches of the same name.
I know of one case, the illegitimate child of a Berlin missionary at Zuar, who took the name of the missionary. It's a very well-known, very respected family, but you have got the official family listed in the genealogical records, and then you've got the unofficial family, but they are blood relatives. So it did happen, but quite often, it's not when they took the name of the owner. It may be that the owner could have had a child by that woman, but then she would have been set free. But it was also a custom to distinguish between two Adonises. So they would give Adonis Low and Adonis van der Merwe to distinguish on what farm they lived and who their owners were, because they had the same name. So in a few cases there was a genealogical line with the owner, but mostly it just to distinguish him from, where are you from? I'm from the Wet, I'm from the Villiers, so that sort of thing. Yes, ma'am.
I've always thought that the Malays, the Cape Malays, seem to have been such a big population because of the whole Malay quarter was big, and the whole Muslim culture of Cape Town was quite strong, and also the long straight hair of sort of from the Malaysian kind of genes, and yet if most of the slaves came from Mozambique and Madagascar, then the Malaysians, where did they fit in?
Until 1770, the vast majority of slaves came from India, proper India, Bengal, Malabar, Ceylon. The vast majority, only very few came from what we would call Malaysia today. The rest came from India and from Indonesia. And it's it's eerie. I was at the conference in Dar es Salaam in September, and I met an Indonesian professor who is the split image of a professor at Western Cape, who people sometimes think he's a Malay, but he's a very good Christian. Because of the outward appearance, they are split images. The one from Indonesia and the one from Western Cape, born and bred at the Cape. So, but it's a misnomer to call them the Cape Malays or the Malay quarter, because the vast majority came from India and not from Malaysia. So this is acknowledged by all historians now. Yes, sir.
Dr. Heese, thank you very much. 2 questions. In Swellendam, the story says that the Mozambicans were unskilled laborers and that the Malays were skilled laborers. You mentioned there that the Mozambican slaves were also skilled.
Yes.
Second question. All of your records go up to 1834.
Yeah.
I know that after 1834 that those slaves had to work for another 4 years.
That's correct.
Before they were released,
Yeah.
a government gazette from 1848 has got 17 slaves registered in Swellendam. How do we find out about their history after 1834?
There is a government publication of 1849, blue book by the Cape Parliament, and the title is something like Cape Servants and Owners Act, something like that. And which the farmers complained that the freed slaves went to the mission stations where they became idle. They didn't want to work and they lost their labor. And they wanted to put pressure on the mission stations to release these people so that all the mission stations, all the mission institutions from Cape Town right up to the Seskai had to give all statistics about the people on the mission stations. The age, were they able to work, could they read or write, were they married, and that is available in this 1849, what is it, servants, it's a...
Isn't it Servants and Masters Act?
Masters and Servants and Masters Act. It's about this thick, but the information is incredible, which you find in that. And you will find it, for example, Zohar is there. And you will find all these institutions with everything you can think of. Hananal, of course, as well, all the people mentioned there. Yes, sir.
By implication, the owners got compensation. By implication, the slaves didn't get compensated.
No, no, nobody ever thought about that.
That's right.
In America, for example, after the end of the Civil War, 1866, the owners who lost their slaves were never compensated by the government. So we were sort of lucky, or the slave owners were sort of lucky, or previous slave owners, that compensation was paid in Mauritius, in Cape Town, Cape Colony, right. By the way, there's a website where you can, University College of London, UCL, you can find out if one of your ancestors owned slaves and how much they were paid in payments started about 1835, 36, 1837. You can find out how much cash your great-grandfather received as compensation. I worked on that list, full of mistakes, because they couldn't read the old Dutch names, the handwriting, so there are a lot of mistakes, but if you are lucky, with a straightforward surname you can put in the name and see all the results for that.
Would DNA show up where you come from in terms of racial background?
I have a few friends high up in genealogy, and I asked one of them really high up in the whole structure, and he said he doesn't believe in it because the samples taken from various parts are too small. Once you've got 50% or 80% of samples from everybody has been tested, then you can start getting results. But funny things show up, which is nearly impossible, of people at the Cape with North American, Native American genetic material. That it. People who did all the research said this is impossible. We've got people from India, Indonesia, from Arabs, Europeans, the whole lot, but I don't think that any Native Americans arrived at the Cape, yeah, and our children. Sorry. Yes, ma'am.
The gentleman at the front asked, how did they make them work? There's your answer.
Yes. By the way, I have to tell you this. In this 1849 report, Servants, what? Masters and Servants Act. All the veldconnector, all the had to write reports, they had a list of questions and they had to answer it. On how much do they pay these people who work for them, what they do, what they do for a living. And this one, south of Beaufort West, he wrote that he has a shepherd who goes with the cattle or the sheep, and he stays away for a month. And part of the rations is half a bucket of dacha. And he suggested it worked so well that other people should start rewarding their slaves and their ex-slaves in the same way. And of course the tot system, that's from times immemorial. The first slave school, the children who attended school were rewarded with a piece of tobacco, chewing tobacco, and a small tot of brandy. 1660 at the Cape, at the slave school. So this was, of course, it's a way to control your labor. And I saw at Caledon in 1953 how the system worked. At least in the evening when they all got back from the fields. This is the sad part of it, and you know the results of it, of fetal alcohol syndrome. It's a horrible story. It's horrible.
What about whipping and so on?
Sorry?
What about whipping?
Yeah. There's a book written by Robert Ross, Cape of Torments. If you want to read about how tough and how rough the Cape was. But what he did not think of was that all the rules and regulations and laws that were at the Cape also came from Holland. The same sort of punishment was meted out in Holland as at the Cape. And these horrible stories, but this was also European history. If you entered a small town in Holland, you saw the person, only a skeleton left. They had this phrase, let the birds of the heaven come and devour and wind and rain and destroy the... This was 18th century Holland, it was South Africa. So, of course, there were a lot of abuse. People talk about slavery. It depended on the character and the personality of the person on the farm. Pater familias. If he was a sadist, he was a sadist. And the women, his wife, and the children suffered as well as the slaves. Not only the slaves, the wife as well. Buitendag, Karel Buitendag is a well-known case. He treated his wife, his slave very badly, but also his wife. Otto, they called him Os. He was the same sort of person. The other farmers or the other slave owners said, I'm going to sell you to Os, Baas Otto, because he was known for cruelty, but he also treated his wife the same way, and he ended up leaving everything in Somerset West and going to Cape Town. He was drunk. He died a drunk and a washout. So I feel sorry for the slaves, but I also feel very sorry for the wives in the middle of nowhere in the High Karoo, 50 miles from the next neighbor. And you've got the husband who is absolutely cruelty itself. It's human nature, unfortunately.
Hans, I think we have to call it a day now. I can see that people are not all that comfortable in their chairs anymore. They're pretty hard. So I'm going to ask Henny Stein to come forward and to thank you very much for your talk this evening.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's always a privilege to say thank you. Philip mentioned that you were born in 1944 and one of your hobbies is motor cars. You still look like a sports model. With mags and modified upholstery. And I would like you to know that I would any day pay £7.10 for you.
Thank you very much, quite lucky.
Somebody once said that life is not measured by the breaths that you take, but by the moments that take your breath away. And tonight was really one of those moments, Hans, that took our breaths away, and we are so privileged to have had you here. So sorry we could only have about an hour of your time. We know it's an effort for you to drive from Stellenbosch to Swellendam, but I believe it's the beginning of a little holiday for you and your wife, and we thought you might need some fuel for the way, so we would gladly like to give that to you, and we hope you will enjoy this with your wife and think of us in doing so. Thank you very much.
Baie dankie.